infrastructure is for people and by people, it kind of makes sense to involve people who are going to end up using it and operating it and having to deal with it.
Welcome back to Infrastructure Connections, the podcast where we explore what makes sustainable infrastructure work. Brought to you by the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. I'm your host, Seth Scott, and today we'll be speaking about equity and culture with our guest, Dr. Sina Cotter Tait. Take a deep breath for this one. Sina is a civil engineer and director at Collective Success, an engineering and procurement firm located in New Zealand. Formerly a member of the Engineering New Zealand Governing Board, she currently serves in a governance capacity for several infrastructure-related agencies. She's currently serving on the boards of Whitestone Contracting, Kiwi Rail Holdings, Engineering New Zealand, as well as many, many others. Sina, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Researching your background, there are so many interesting questions to explore, but my first question is, how do you do it all? Because in the time it takes me to take the recycling to the curb, it seems like you've been in 3 board meetings.
I don't actually do that much. It's like anybody. I'm just really old, and so there's a bunch of stuff in my CV.
But they're all to present, so.
Well, yes, I am juggling a bit. One thing that's kind of worked in my favour is that I've never worked full time. So I became a parent while I was at university, and I've always been a part-time sort of student and part-time employee. And so that kind of allows you to do more than one thing at a time. I don't know that that's always evident from my CV. And the other thing is that for me, I think if you get a strong sense of purpose in your work, and if you are clear about how the work that you're doing is helping to build the legacy that you want to leave, I think that just you get really enthusiastic about doing work and taking lots of opportunities as they come up. So I feel like I've been really lucky in my career in that I've had lots of opportunities to do some things that are a little bit different, and they've led to other opportunities that I've been able to take up too. But it's all kind of centered around the kind of work I want to do, the kind of people I want to work with, and the kind of impact I want to leave.
That's a fantastic attitude to have.
Thanks.
So you've been a civil engineer and an engineer to contract for a long time. How did that transition into equity and culture?
It's a really good question, because it's not something that you talk about when you're training to be an engineer. It's certainly not something that's evident in the engineer to contract role, right? And yet, when you live in New Zealand, you're delivering infrastructure projects, you were working with people, and some of those projects for me, I'm working out in the community with, for instance, a Māori community on Māori land, developing a sewerage scheme to service them. It just kind of makes sense. Why wouldn't you involve the people who are going to be the end users of the infrastructure? Why can't they be involved in the decision making and influence the outcome of that infrastructure, which is ultimately for them? So even though it's not something that we are encouraged or formally trained in, it sort of becomes evident as you do your work. Infrastructure is for people and by people. It kind of makes sense to involve people who are going to end up using it and operating it and having to deal with it at the very earliest stages. So that's kind of how I became aware of it, I suppose.
And this is a good time to have you on the show, because those kinds of attitudes have come under question lately. I don't think anybody really believes it's going away. It's all political theater, but we do have to work harder to tell that story. So what do you think? Why do you think there is a recent push against diversity, and why won't this change our diversity efforts?
I don't know. It's sort of hard for me to talk about this stuff, because it always sounds quite self-serving when I talk about the pros of diversity. I guess I'd start by saying I see diversity as a very inclusive term. It's not just demographic diversity; it's diversity of thought, it's diversity of lived experience, and it's basically embracing difference and understanding the value that different perspectives and different kind of ways of understanding the world can enhance the infrastructure outcomes that we come up with. I think it's probably something that is changing in our industry, albeit slowly, and change makes people uncomfortable sometimes. All you have to do in terms of the second part of your question to think about why it's not going to go away, our demographics are changing. So the very nature of our workforce and the very nature of the people that we work with is changing as well. We're going to have to get used to working with a more diverse range of people, whether we're comfortable with it or not.
I think what makes you a go-to expert in this field is really just that you've made such a great impact in the area. You care very deeply about the culture and social change involved in infrastructure. So since most people think of infrastructure as the built environment, where do you see infrastructure making these intangible impacts on social and cultural issues?
The big one that I see, and you can probably, if you've picked up anything I've publicly said or written, the big one is that infrastructure is there's economic opportunity in delivering infrastructure and in maintaining it, and I think that economic opportunity is, there's opportunities to share that across a wider set of people. So I think if you look at the work that Amotai is doing, trying to create connections with Māori and Pacifica-owned businesses to construction work, that is a kind of an example of trying to bring that economic opportunity to people who, there are barriers for some of those businesses and trying to access those. And I guess the sense of agency, people sort of feeling a sense of ownership over the infrastructure that they benefit for and actually they pay for. So rather than having something done to you, actually being part of building a solution for yourself and your community, I think that's really important. For me, probably the career highlight for me over my many years in the industry was after the Canterbury earthquakes. I had the chance, I guess, as an engineer to be involved in the emergency response and also the recovery, and to be able to use your skills and be part of rebuilding your own community. It was incredibly powerful. And that's kind of an opportunity that I think should be available to a wider set of people, not just a narrow set of contractors and suppliers.
You did start with an MBA from the University of Canterbury. How do you frame the business case for this diversity, and has anyone quantified the dollar values around it?
For me, the business case argument comes in a very pragmatic sense. Our workforce is changing, right? The demographics of New Zealand, of Aotearoa, are changing. I think Māori is expected to make up around 30% of the workforce in 20 to 30 years' time. Pacifica also a very rapidly growing proportion of our population, and so that has implications for workforce, for leadership in the workforce. It also has implications for your customer base and the kind of cultural values that businesses will need to have. So if you look at it from that point of view, I think the business case is clear. If your customer market's changing, if your workforce pool is changing, you're going to need to change with it, or you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know part of that is just training up the workforce to take different roles as well. I see one of the things we hear a lot about recently is the importance of a pipeline, not just for the economic prosperity, but for the continuity of professional learning and advancement and keeping people in the industry and keeping them from moving to Australia. So we have a lot of Australian listeners. What are the challenges you see during this quiet period in the industry, and how can the industry retain that great talent while our pipeline is down?
I mean, it's a tough time in New Zealand at the moment. While we are in a bit of a pause, and it's tough on the industry, I have to say. It's tough on engineers, it's tough on contractors too. We're just sort of waiting for that work to pick up. What I'm seeing is that I'm a director of a construction company down here. We're seeing this as a time to really invest in the training and the preparation for growth of our people. That's really all you can do is really hunker down, try and look after your people, try and train, use the opportunity to embed and build some of those internal systems that you don't get to when you're really busy actually doing work, and just sort of prepare for the work that we know needs to be done. I might be a bit off brand here, but I don't personally, I've lived in Australia. I haven't worked there myself, but my second son was born there. And I see a lot of advantages in people going offshore and experiencing, a different workforce in a different country, different sets of rules and regulations, different workplace cultures, and then bringing some of that knowledge back to New Zealand. I don't even think that that's a bad thing. I'm quite open-minded when it comes to people leaving. If it's temporary and you need to go overseas and pay the mortgage, that's cool. If you come back and you bring knowledge and stuff that you've gained from the Aussies who do things probably a bit differently to how we do it in New Zealand, that's got to be good for us too.
Absolutely. Internationally as well. I mean, I come from the US, and I feel like I also bring something different to the table when I'm involved in projects. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that broadening that worldview is always going to be a benefit to the project, to the nation, to the person involved.
Yeah, I do too. I don't think we should be trapping people here. I think we should embrace movement and exchange of ideas.
So you mentioned that starting this talent pipeline can extend right into childhood and early education, especially with that emphasis on maths and science to drive people into an engineering degree. How is that critical to developing engineers later in life?
It's a narrow entry, formal entry to engineering in New Zealand, which requires a certain level of formal education in the secondary system, which in turn relies on the primary system. And it's difficult to change those institutional requirements from tertiary training organisations. I don't think we ever will, because there are international, benchmarking measures that we have to line up with. If we want to grow the pipeline of engineers and scientists, actually, because it's more than just engineers, it's project managers, it's planners, it's scientists, we must grow the capacity of the pipeline upstream of those tertiary institutions, which would be a really good thing for New Zealand. We have, and this is hopefully not too provocative, but I think in New Zealand we have a very unambitious curriculum in our primary education system. Particularly for maths and science. 80% of children when they come to secondary school have never done science. Not really. They might have done a project on spiders, but that's not science. They won't have done classical mechanics. They would have done sort of basic concepts of science as we understand it. And numeracy is good, but it is no substitute for early concept mathematics. And so we're almost putting our kids on the back foot before they get into the secondary system. And the secondary system is, very quickly filters kids for maths and science very quickly. And by the time they get to university, it's a very narrow filtered set of students who are able to enter tertiary study for engineering, science, and those higher qualifications that we need for our industry. So I think, there's a number of factors that underline that, but addressing that pipeline is probably really important for our economic future.
And then that carries right through to university as well. I understand you sponsor a scholarship for Maori and Pacifica engineering students. What's the uptake in those communities, and what's the challenges that they face getting into an engineering career or an infrastructure field?
Well, it sounds like a very strongly equity-based scholarship, and it is intended that way. What I have found is that the applicants, I normally get about sort of 6 to 8 per year. This year I had 10 applicants, which is not many, considering that there are around 700 students enrolled in engineering at Canterbury. The students who tend to apply, and I say tend to because it's not all of them, tend to be students who have whakapapa Māori or Pacifica ancestry, but who have benefited from middle class, upbringings and wealthy schools. Having said that, there have been a few recipients of the scholarship who have had a really tough time, and they are the ones that the scholarship is intended to really support and uplift. So one of them was a young man who dropped out of school from Tokoroa up north, dropped out of school at 16, only decided to enroll in university when he became a teenage father. And he's had he's had a difficult journey to get to where he is, but he's worked incredibly hard and shown, the kind of grit and determination that will make him a fine engineer and leader one day. So those examples are probably the exception rather than the rule for the scholarship. But I'm hopeful that we all bring our identities into engineering in different ways. Some of us will be coming from certain backgrounds which have a bit more privilege than others, and some are a bit more kind of outward with their Indigenous identity than others. But that's okay. We are an inclusive group.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. So you do provide consulting advice on purchasing. That's one of the major areas that you consult on. The City Rail Link recently posted results that allocated 7% of their budget to Maori and Pacifica-owned subcontractors and suppliers. And we know this helps increase competition among suppliers, ultimately leading to competitive pricing overall. So tell us what you're seeing as a result of the shift to local spending and why that's important.
I reckon in the last in the last probably 8 years, I've seen a real uplift in the visibility and the engagement of Pacifica and Māori businesses, as well as employees in terms of skilled trades and pathways into the industry. Perhaps it's partly been driven by government initiative and government agency interest, and really making those pathways available to people. But I have seen a material difference, I believe. I'm part of a workforce development council for Pacific people involved in the construction sector, and that's certainly a group that's providing a bit of energy and momentum around trying to maintain these pathways to big projects for employees, who might otherwise sort of struggle to access this kind of work. I reckon it's really positive. And I think the people that I've spoken to, one of the leaders at City Rail Link, who's no longer there, talked to me with a personal passion he felt for that work and the personal fulfillment that he takes, from creating those opportunities for those people. And that's a really powerful thing too, I think.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that uptake in our projects as well. Yeah, and one of them that's making big headway is the company Amatai, helping organizations employ Maori and Pacifica people and businesses. How did you get involved with them? And more importantly, is that a model that you think could be replicated overseas?
Yes, is the short answer to the second part of your question. How I got involved with them was they called me one day after, I think, a group of colleagues and I published a piece online around how we would like to see Māori and Pacifica form perspectives and economic opportunity form part of the COVID infrastructure-led recovery. And then I had a call from Amatai saying, interested that you're in the space, I'd like to talk to you around sort of providing some procurement training for some of our businesses, and that's kind of how I got to work with them. And what I saw was a group of people really passionate about trying to bridge that gap that we have in infrastructure between procurement requirements and supplier capability. Because, at the moment we've got, when agencies give out work, they've got procurement requirements that are onerous, in terms of the admin that you have to prepare shiny bids, with a lot of written content and pictures, and it takes quite a lot of time and resource to do that, and it tends to favour the big companies because they are the ones who have the capability, the people, the resource to actually do that. For smaller organisations, particularly ones who are really good at building but maybe not so good at writing and presenting, it's a real disadvantage. And what I saw was Amatai sort of trying to step into that gap and helping connect buyers with sellers, because at the end of the day, that's what buyers want. They want people who are good at delivering infrastructure. They don't necessarily care if you're good at writing a bid or not, and yet the only way they can demonstrate value for money when they're rewarding public funds is through this written bid process. So, I think agencies like Amatai stepping into that space is, unfortunately for New Zealand, really critical, like really necessary until we change our procurement approach.
And I think that's the value of diversity, really, is trying to incorporate those different approaches. One of the approaches that you'd mentioned was that you wanted to see a shift in including Indigenous values around collectivism rather than just being focused on technical skills. What does that look like?
That was probably part of a broader conversation that if people know me, they know I get on my soapbox around this. But it's in our industry, we are particularly good at picking people based on their CV and their technical skills. But if you speak to anyone in the industry who's delivered really good work, they will tell you the most important things to manage are relationships with other people. And when I've spoken to people who are good at doing that, they very much sort of take this collectivist approach to delivering big projects. So they think about the end user, they think about the people involved all along the way. And that's kind of what I mean, that sort of worldview of thinking about the outcomes for the people who are going to benefit from the work that you're doing. That's sort of what I was trying to get at with that statement, I suppose. Taking a wider view than just budget and program, I suppose. And certainly taking a wider view than just somebody's qualifications. Actually, trying to understand if we appointed people sort of not just on their technical merit, but also recognise other aspects of merit, such as their ability to relate to other people, their ability to establish a really good sense of purpose in a project team. I think I think we would see a real uplift in performance.
That is so important. I totally agree with that. I've seen organizations where when they have a new technical skill that they need filled, they'll go out and look at the market rather than look at their existing employees and see how they might be able to fulfill that with their own talents. That's absolutely true.
It's a great point.
Tell us about the Diversity Agenda Accord. How did that start, and how are you involved in that?
The purpose of it is to try and uplift the number of diverse leaders within our industry. I think the initial focus was very much on women, but of course that's broadened to a wider sort of definition of diversity now as well. It's an important agency from my experience in participating in events. It's become a forum which is very much needed and valued by people as a place to go if you don't necessarily feel like you belong at some of the more traditional events and forums. It's a place for people to go and, get resources, ideas, share experiences around what it's like to be in the industry and where I think opportunities might lie.
In a lot of ways, it can become a generational change, and it takes a very long period of time, and that might be slow and lack clear signs of advancement. Like previously, you mentioned that over the last 7 years, you've seen a lot of things change, but 7 years can feel like a long time to an individual who's trying to make an advance in the industry. A student you inspire today might not be a CEO or on a board until 20 years from now. So how do you personally endure that slow pace of change, and how do you help others not to be discouraged by it?
Part of the problem with being impatient for change is that you inherently compare yourself to others, right? And sort of where they're at on the same journey. And that's a mistake. That's a false comparison to make. I think you're better to look at the kind of work that you want to do on a daily basis and realize that you can't separate your identity from the work that you do. And to really focus on enjoying and finding a sense of purpose in your job today is probably the best path. I'm a firm believer that if you enjoy what you're doing today and you look for the opportunities to do the best work that you can, other opportunities will open up when the time is ready, when the time is right, I should say. And I don't know. I think it would be a real shame if somebody was spending 20 years waiting for that CEO role, and in the meantime hadn't enjoyed the 20 years of time they'd spent in the industry, because all we've got is time, right? And the CEO role isn't all it's cracked up to be. It sort of goes back to your priorities, being really clear on what your priorities are for your life. And I think you do your best work when you are feeling fulfilled and when you are feeling a sense of purpose. And when you're doing your best work, that's when the opportunities are most likely to come your way. Whatever those opportunities are is really up to you. It really depends on your idea of what success is. I know for many people, success is CEO role. It was never that for me. Other people have different definitions of success. So I think it's helpful to sit down and think about what you would regard as a successful life for yourself, and look at your sort of work back engineer it if you like, to where you are today and figure out what you want, what you want your work trajectory to look like. One of the things we had to do when I was doing an MBA is we had to write our own obituary, which was intensely valuable, to spend an hour writing what it is that you hope your children and your friends would say about you. Really focuses you on what is important to you in your life. And I found that fundamentally useful to understand what I wanted to do with my time. And I think that's really helpful for anyone.
You must have needed more than an hour to talk about it based on the qualifications you have now.
I only got a couple.
Well, the good news is that we are seeing that advancement, and it is happening. And even with the recent setbacks and political discussions, I think it's inevitable that it's going to continue forward. What are some of the innovations you see in infrastructure that excite you right now in terms of cultural impact, and where do you see equity and diversity changing infrastructure in the next 10 to 20 years?
Probably one of the most exciting shifts I've seen is in the water engineering space, the water infrastructure space of the last few years. The embrace of Māori Indigenous values into all aspects of water engineering has been quite eye-opening for me to see. I've been 20-something years in this industry, and it started off as being very much about pipes and pumps. And now we are talking about nature-based solutions, low-impact solutions, working together with iwi communities to develop sustainable, long-term, low-impact solutions that are much better, much cheaper, just better in every sort of sense. And I think that's a transition in one small part of the infrastructure sector that needs to happen across other sectors as well. I think I also have the Christchurch earthquake rebuild has sort of provided an example of expressions of cultural identity through rebuilding. So you'll see, I know you've been to Christchurch, you'll see a lot of our buildings now have, highly visible Māori decorative elements on them. And if you look a bit closer, some of our best buildings have actually got a highly expressed Māori, what's the word I'm looking for, character in them. So there is, the New Justice Precinct, for example, has a korowai on the outside of it, and that represents the aspiration of Māori for it to be like not a place of punishment and correction, but a place of where you're having care wrapped around you, right, and to try and rebalance a sense of justice. So that kind of thing is quite exciting to me as well. And I think the most exciting thing to me has been the embrace of that by non-Māori people who've learnt a lot, who've really been touched by learning something new and by the meaningfulness it has for people. So yeah, those are probably two innovations. And the third one I think of, it's not really an innovation, but have you heard of SiteSafe?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of a industry-led kaupapa, right? And they lean very heavily on the mana of their Māori and Pacific leaders to try and bring about a culture change in the sector. So it's not a built solution, it's more a culture kind of initiative, but I think that is a really interesting kaupapa that other parts of the sector could really look to.
So over your long career, what has been the most intractable challenge? What's the one thing that you continue to have to deal with, and how are you working to overcome it in the industry? Not you personally, it's okay.
So many challenges.
We all procrastinate, it's okay.
Yeah, do a lot of that. I think, there's just so many opportunities, right? There's so many problems, which is so many opportunities to do things, to get involved. And that's probably my biggest challenge, is saying no to stuff, because there's so much that's interesting. There's so many cool people I want to work with and learn from. I think another thing, and I sort of alluded to it before, is that really persistent sense of comparison culture that we have. I don't think it's just our industry. I think everyone has this, you can't help but sort of compare yourself to your peers, and sort of, wonder about how well you're doing. But it's stupid. That's such a mistake to make. We're not in a race, right? We're all working together and we're all walking our own paths and our own journeys. And it's something that, I have to remind myself of now and then, that, I might not be doing what such and such is doing, but that's okay. I'm happy with where I am, and I'm happy with where I'm going and what I've done. So I think that's probably one of the big things. And for me, it's about priorities and legacy, because it's not a race, it's your life, and every day counts.
That's excellent. Well, what do you think what is one thing that you think our listeners could do to help promote equity and diversity in the workplace?
Well, what I usually say to people is hire more diverse people. It's really hard to be, most people have some experience of this in one form or another. It's hard to be the one who's different in the office if there's only one here. And so the more people we have with the more kind of differences, the more we'll all be different. And the easier it'll be to feel like you belong, but also not have to struggle with feeling like you don't belong.
I really like that. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So thank you very much for the invitation. And I look forward to tuning into your podcast in future.
Thank you for listening to Season 1 of Infrastructure Connections. Please take a moment to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and we want your feedback. Drop us a line to let us know what you think. Stay tuned for Season 2 of Infrastructure Connections.